great to be everybody, and great to follow such a really interesting input from Pippa. Clarke, Jarrett, I'm Director of Special Projects at AHNA Group. And the topic here, this panel, is to carry on that conversation about screening and vetting in insider risk. And what we'll hopefully do is put some meat on the bones of what you just heard. And we've got a stellar panel here, really excited to have them all, and they're giving up the time to input, so I really appreciate that, especially to, I know it's been mentioned, but for Shivindra to come over from India here, I think is exceptional, so thank you so much. I think Rick's asked me to chair this panel because I've been talking about this subject and what Pippa's been talking about at conferences about how companies don't monitor insider risks and how they miss the quiet quitting, the emotional stress people are under, the problems people have. It's not joined up within companies. And I imagine when Pippa talked about companies' insider risk profiles, I bet a lot of people in this room are thinking, I may not have heard of one, I definitely haven't got one. So we're helping lots of companies that aren't doing that, and that it's a real sort of soapboxing in mind that people need to join this up to fight those risks. So it's a really interesting topic, and so we've got a great panel to go into that. So probably kick it off with an initial question. Again, exactly following on from Pippa's talk there. We've heard about the risks, what generates them, and I'll point this question to Neil, from your experience at HSBC. Companies obviously need to do more to monitor their staff and insider risks, but how can that be done? And you know, what do you see as good practice, and what are you doing in HSBC to manage those problems?
I think one thing I take away from it is that we've got to get better at it. We've got to evolve it. And I think it starts right from the very beginning and throughout like a colleague's journey, even from recruitment. I think vetting is very important, but sometimes there can be quite a regimented recruitment process where you're reading out set questions, looking for certain answers in order to score and choose a candidate that you're going to bring on. But when you then come to vetting, I think within HSBC, something we're currently looking at or trying to evolve is around, number one, do we just accept what our third-party vetting company is doing for us? And subsequently, what additional questions are we able to ask? Number two, where does it stop? Because predominantly it's the colleague has now joined the organisation. And is there a 3-month revisit of any vetting that's been done? Because in years gone by, there's been experience how a successful applicant has probably resigned rather than having a disciplinary process in the previous company, and that can go with it. And then the cultural stuff is something that we're really trying to focus on at the moment. First one would be a couple of, like a saying that we've got around notice what you notice. That kind of gut intuition every now and then when you've seen something and spotted it, and maybe you haven't called it out. And then that leads on to the biggest thing, which is around a speak-up culture. We're currently looking at having speak-up guardians, as it would be, where people are encouraged to go to a certain guardian to be able to say we've noticed something and we want to feel that we can say it without any fear of consequence or lapse of psychological safety, as an example.
Brilliant. Thanks, Neil. I think there's some really good practical examples of what can be done, and I think maybe people will ask you a question to follow up. You talked about the need to bring HR and other parts of organisations and companies in. Now, you know, when I spoke to companies in HR, they said, we can't do that, we don't do that. How have you managed that? Because you're doing that, you're very passionate about that.
I'm not saying that I'm doing it very well, but you're absolutely right. There is a reluctance, but what I've tend to have found is that it's about the explanation of why am I asking for the information that I'm asking for. So I will be asking for I'm not just asking for somebody's personnel record. If there's an individual that has been brought to somebody's attention, and I'm not just saying to HR, hand over all of your information or open up all of your information to me. If I can actually explain the journey of the information I'm looking for and how that impacts the risk evaluation or the risk assessment process, then there is then actually a precedent that they can provide that information for me. It doesn't go against information sharing regulations, etc. It's fine. I simply can't just go on a fishing exercise with them. And as I say, that's about communication. And we heard this morning actually all about the importance of stakeholder engagement and understanding and rapport building, etc. That's part of the program and part of the process as well. So it's really about explaining why you're asking for something, and if they can see the benefits, then they will eventually provide it.
That's really good to hear, and hopefully the audience here can take those points away and take them back to your organisation, because that's the blockers that I've found in organisations getting this done. So that's really, really helpful, Pippa. Thank you. Then we talked about the need for ongoing monitoring, screening, the speak-up champions, etc. So I've got a question here around how can organisations balance that sort of regime and strategy with continuing to foster trust and engagement within their staff. And Shivindra, though work in India, you may have some slightly different views, but be interested in your take on that, how that's done and how important it is.
Yes, thanks a lot. Rick, first and foremost, thanks for the opportunity. It's a pleasure to be here. It sort of, truth be told, baffles me that in today's day and age, we are still considering it as an either-or. Where we come from, our digital privacy is still at its infancy stage. So the Indian Privacy Act has just been cleared by the Parliament last year, and as we speak, it is coming about. Then, of course, things might evolve at our end. But as of now, a lot of the strategy being used in India is determined a lot by the fact that we are handling a lot of Western data, and those who are applying for jobs, in these global development centers or the BPOs or the back end or multinational corporations, they understand that there is criticality surrounding that. Secondly, generally, the economy at large and people, they tend to, I don't mean to sound rude, probably care a bit more about not having a job, because we know that there isn't a support structure if you're out of job. So with that background, it becomes a relatively different approaching or creating a culture. And having said that, we've seen a paradigm shift in the way people are thinking in our part of the world. So way back, I'll take you back to probably 20 odd years, there were probably, in this country, I guess, 5-6 major newspapers. And you had to make a physical effort and some money to go buy a newspaper and read it and then form your opinions. What we are seeing in India is that through WhatsApp and through Instagram, through Twitter, through Facebook, a lot is being literally chucked at us first thing in the morning. So during your commute to work, you've been bombarded with so much information which not necessarily you had sought first thing in the morning. And we are seeing a paradigm shift in the way people have started thinking. There are political views, sometimes there are extremist views. And as a security consultant, as a security professional, we see that as a massive red flag. And hence, we firmly believe it is imperative for this sort of monitoring to go on. Yeah, it can't be one-off.
And with Lancers, are you supporting companies in India to do that sort of work on insider risk?
Yes, we are. We are certainly doing that. Plus, we are also bringing in some technology and solution from the West into India to further enhance it. Because at our end, the volumes are so high. Like, just to put things in perspective, Lancers does close to around 15,000 verifications a month. So we have to have tech and hopefully someday AI as well embedded into this.
Thank you. And Neil, if I can just bring you back in on that with your HSBC experience, how are you finding that sort of management of staff engagement and trust when you've got security risk to manage as well?
I think probably when you've got a team, I think that's one of the biggest challenges in order to keep engagement going, keep the ability to speak up, the psychological safety stuff. It's a real challenge, but I think that's why we need qualified leaders to be able to lead the teams and to have the right kind of culture in the organisation that you work for. I equally think that it's worth considering what happens when things go wrong and what support network is provided. A couple of years ago, we had an example where it wasn't an insider risk, but there was a reason to dismiss someone. But the impact that had on the team that was working with was underestimated, that somebody had become part of the team, worked with them for 3 or 4 months, and then was suddenly extracted because a little bit of extra vetting had found something out, and then suddenly you're looking at what care can be provided and what support as well. So I think it's a huge challenge because an engaged workforce leads to great customer service, which leads to great things for your shareholders, basically. So really important.
Yeah, I mean, in my experience, that's a huge challenge. That's where you need the buy-in from the top of the organisation to say this is our culture, because as you said, Neil, the culture of an organisation is so important for performance, for engagement and culture. So you can't break that. You've got to sort of build around that, but also protect the companies internally. Just broaden it out slightly. So, Dan, I know you were part of the Angelini Inquiry. You gave evidence to that, into the vetting and sort of management failures of Wayne Cousins, who murdered Sarah Everard. Looking at, I mean, he was vetted as a police officer to an extent, and you know, there are some shocking findings in the management of him in the report. But looking at people's character, which obviously isn't vetting, it'd be interesting your thoughts on, do we need more to understand people's characters rather than just their history and what they've done in the past?
I think what I'm going to say has to be caveated through organisation and the scale and this kind of stuff when it comes to screening. But yes, I mean, vetting is only a snapshot in time. History depends on what a person admits to. And I think that if we're looking at this as a broader issue, there may be certain characteristics, certain traits, certain organisational cultural issues that you want from an individual applying to an organisation that you can tease out during the recruitment process. You know, historically, culturally, there was always this divide, I think, between vetting, which was done by the security guys, and the recruitment side, which was done more of a HR process, and you can streamline the two there. I think another point, which again is plagiarising from Pippa and others, in part, is that we also need to think about, you know, this idea of aftercare, and this is one of the major issues that comes out of the Angelini Inquiry report and subsequent vetting issues regarding UK policing. The idea of aftercare is this is an ongoing process. When we think about vetting, my students who will chat to me about all sorts, including drugs, pornography and other things, which when applying for the civil service, they get really angst-ridden about the vetting process, but they don't get angst-ridden about kind of some of the other things that come after this. So I think we need to think about aftercare, and when we think about aftercare, it can either be punitive, so it can either be identify the bad apples and then remove them, or it can be more about an ongoing process of career review and appraisal and identifying individuals, as people identified before, with characteristics that might make them a potential insider risk, but nipping that in the bud before it escalates and become a much wider issue there. So I think in answer to the question, yes, there are, when it comes to the recruitment issue, there are things you can do here to look at characteristics that the values you want in your employees. But then also it comes to this idea of aftercare and thinking about managing individuals throughout their career.
Shivindra, I'd be interested if you have any views on that, sort of how we manage, you know, support staff within an organisation, and whether you've got experience of doing that within your role.
Well, you see, many times what we've realized, funnily enough, during corporate fraud, this comes up, that there was an insider who was trying to, play around. What we realized that, going to the point which Neil made about having an impact on the teams, it's imperative to have transparency. That if there is a reason, but at least in our regulatory environment, it is still possible. I'm not too sure about here, that what has happened and to whatever extent it is possible to reveal, so that the team is able to absorb and understand that this is what's gone on, rather than being left to find whatever answer they can. So that's what we've observed, and we've faced this issue primarily in those scenarios. Yeah.
Thank you. I listened to Paul Maskell earlier. I was struck by his comments on, when people are in employment, there comes a point when either pressure or opportunity, or both, and they combine and they do something. That's one of the things which, I've been looking at and interested in how that affects people within an organisation. And we've heard about the stress people are under, more stress in the workplace, more emotional well-being stresses, quiet quitting, active disengagement, non-attendance, all that sort of stuff that every company is facing. And I suppose what we're hearing here is that those factors are not just performance factors, because when those people that are facing those issues become under stress, whether that's internal or external, or when they have the opportunity to combine, they may do something which not only damages performance and their team, or they become toxic, it can damage profits, and ultimately they can become an insider risk that does something catastrophic to a company. So I think that's where I really sort of took that point from Paul Maskell, and be interested in the sort of the panel's view here of how, and it links to some of the stuff we've been talking about, how organisations better support staff, that sort of well-being side, but link that to the security, how we wrap and support staff. I mean, I don't know whether Dan, Neil, Pippa, you've got views on how organisations can do that better, any good practice that the audience can take away?
I think from my perspective, this is all part of the same thing, and it's around communication. So it's around actually explaining to people, and again we talked about this morning, the psychological safety, the physical safety. It's all about safety, and I think when people understand that your organisation is trying to improve safety for everybody across the piece, and they communicate that well. And there's also additional work going in the background around sort of culture, and the culture speaks to that as well. Then actually it has to be this holistic approach. It has to be sort of every bit is actually part of this process or this programme to really then be able to make that difference. But you're absolutely right, and I think also that the point around being transparent about the processes is also really key. We can talk about this until the cows come home. If we don't actually respond and appropriately investigate and do something about problematic behaviour, then it's pointless. It's utterly pointless. And we can sort of have all the communication strategies coming down from the top, but the people who are actually at the coalface, they realise that actually it doesn't mean anything, and therefore they will switch off and they'll ignore. So we have to actually follow through with what we're saying as well.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Pippa, because that's one of the things, when I left policing, counter-terrorism policing 4 years ago, but actually, policing's been through the coals, and that's because of lack of management, lack of dealing with people that are doing bad things, and that toxicity grows, and then it boils over. So that I think is a really important thing. And Neil, I was really impressed with your comment. I can't remember, you called them speaking up.
Or speak up guardians.
Speak up guardians.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't see anything more you can share. We've got a couple of minutes left on how that works, because that sounds like a really good policy.
Yeah, of course. I think it's been around HSBC for about 5 years. There was quite a lot of work that needed to be done around engagement, as I'm sure many companies face into. And the NHS we'd had some collaboration with the NHS around something they've been doing in terms of the importance of their roles and what they face into. And so we adopted a Speak Up Guardian, which is to add to the other channels. We have a Speak Up channel where you can ring up an anonymous line and not divulge any of your details. There's other kind of counselling that you can go to. You can go to your line manager. But there seemed to be something missing around just being able to notice what you notice, say it to somebody without the fear of it being shared onwards, but also to ask for advice. So I'm not very happy with this, I don't know what to do with it, and the Speak Up Guardian was trained to be able to go, well, let's go on the intranet together, let's navigate through what it can be done in order to provide that additional channel. And I think we've seen branching out as a response to that. We've started seeing mental health first aid courses that we've been rolling out, because I think that's really important, especially for the aftercare as well. And then some other kind of thoughts around how do we train line managers to properly coach and to have a structure around one-to-ones, because if you have got a great relationship with your line manager, having that one-to-one to be able to say, I may be observing some form of behaviour or something that could be of interest to the company is another channel as well. That's really helpful. And I'd recommend anybody in the audience, in the US they've got the Insider Threat Task Force. They've got a great mantra of moving from report to support, because they recognise from the studies in the US that it's often people in crisis that need help. They don't need reporting, they need support. I think that's what the panel have really reflected well. Maybe just the last close, I'll just turn to you, Dan. I know you've written on vetting and screening. I mean, would you be able to just summarise what you've heard and just pick out some of the key themes if possible?
Well, again, it's the idea that screening someone or just screening an individual is just the beginning of a process. So vetting, just completing a vetting form is not the beginning and the end. It's a whole aftercare process, and this continues throughout a career. And that's in one sense, I think that the process of security screening, aftercare, can actually be quite a supportive process as well, both in giving employees the ability to speak out and to challenge some organisational behaviours that have issues in the real world, but also the ability to mentor individuals who might be outstanding individuals within your organisation who might be going through a bad time, and to nip things in the bud before it escalates into a real situation.
Brilliant. Thank you for that summary. It's really helpful. It's nice to sort of have you at the panel. I think got a great view and a similar view on how this should be approached. So I'd like to thank the panel for an amazing input and their time. Thank you.